is it calling?
Connie.
Oh.
Trying to call Connie in.
Oh, she's at the fair.
Oh.
I'd like to call the school board meeting for August 16th, 2016 for the Des Moines Public Schools to order. Please take the roll.
Ms. Langford?
Here.
Ms. Ellsburn?
Here.
Ms. Anderson?
Here.
Mr. Barron?
Here.
Ms. Caldwell-Johnson?
Here.
Ms. Newcomb?
Here.
Ms. Bozen, are you there?
She got disconnected.
Oh, did she? Okay. Okay. Can you tell her to call in again?
Ms. Bozen is trying to reach us by phone for tonight, so please excuse any technical difficulties. We hope to have her present for all or most of the meeting tonight. First item on our agenda is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
Make motion.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Newcomb, second by Ms. Anderson. Please vote. Connie, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
All right. Do you?
Yes.
Yeah, she's like,
Connie votes yes.
turn her down.
Thank you, Connie. Welcome. Next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes. May I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes from August 2nd, 2016?
Move approval. Second.
Motion by Ms. Caldwell-Johnson, second by Ms. Ellsburn. Please vote. Ms. Bozen? Connie? Connie, are you there?
Connie, can you hear me?
Motion passes 6-0. Next item on our agenda is the list of consent items. Or, I'm sorry, we do have district recognitions tonight, don't we?
Yes.
Turn it over to Dr. Ahart.
Kind of a little more good. Yeah.
Good evening, board. When the high school baseball season began this year, not many people were looking to Roosevelt as one of the top teams in the state. When the season ended, there were no doubts about the Rough Riders. Roosevelt finished the season with a record of 33-11, including the school's fourth trip to the state tournament. In fact, the Riders beat the two-time defending state champs Southeast Polk 10-1 to earn the berth in the state tournament. After a convincing 11-3 win in the first round over Urbandale, a two-out homer in the bottom of the last inning of the semifinal game marked a heartbreaking end to Roosevelt's run at a state title. Not only are congratulations in order for a great season and a return to state, but Roosevelt's fans also deserve our thanks for their strong attendance both nights at Principal Park. To share a little more about the team and the season, I'm pleased to introduce Coach Chris Miller. Coach Miller?
There he is.
Hey, Kate.
Looks like he's doing okay.
Okay. I guess I wasn't prepared for all this, but it was a really good season and extremely proud of the guys and how hard they worked and the position they put themselves in. Just a great group of guys, and it's a season that we'll always remember, but hopefully we can build on and we'll get back to work and hopefully we can do it again someday. So,
Coach, who threw the opening pitch out in the first game?
yeah, that was. I think it might. We should probably do that every year. That sounds good. That's right. That's right. There are plenty of the guys present here. If you guys would like to stand up and
Yeah,
introduce yourselves to the
Yeah.
board, that'd be great.
coming up. Yeah.
We want to.
Come on up.
Come on.
I'm just going to interrupt you real quick, though. I have to say, the first game at state, early, it was the second or third inning. This is one of the things that impresses me most about this team. There was an error, and I don't remember whose error it was, but I'll tell you, the team just knew how to handle diversity. You never got any sense that there was any loss of faith or momentum, and then a couple innings later, it was good night, Irene. So it was really fun to watch, and you guys always represent yourself with such class. I'm really proud of you. Thank you. All right.
I'm William Hawks. I was a utility player this year. I did a lot. And so
Thank you.
Ability players, man.
I'm Fletcher Kirk. I pretty much just courtesy ran, and so yeah, I stole a couple bases.
That's awesome. Yep.
I'm Noah Grimes, and I played right field.
Awesome.
Hey, Noah.
I'm Zach Lynn. I played second base. I was on the newspaper, if you saw that.
I'm Cade Meharry, and I caught.
I'm Trey Stanton, and I played a little bit of second, first, and I pitched.
I'm Harley Davidson. I played first, and I pitched a little bit.
I'm Will Niggett, and I was a pitcher.
I'm Stephen Lowe. I DH and played around the field when I was needed.
I'm Ryan Delaria, and I kept book.
Nice.
I'm Deshaun Bradley, and I was a courtesy runner.
I'm John Swan, and I played shortstop and pitch.
Yes, you did.
I'm Nick Ballard, and I played left field.
Nice. Yeah.
And our next recognition, for many of our students, the summer is not an off-season from academics, but rather an opportunity to further their studies and participate in larger research projects. I'm pleased to share with you some examples this evening. Maureen Griffin, come on up, Maureen, is the director of the STEM Academy at Hoover High School and helps coordinate some high-level science opportunities for our students through Iowa State University's Young Engineer and Scientist program, as well as the Iowa Lakeside Laboratory. Thanks to her efforts, students get to work side by side with scientists and researchers on projects ranging from the study of cosmic rays to zebrafish stem cells to data collection in wetlands and much, much more. I'm pleased to introduce Maureen, who along with several of her students will share some highlights of their summer research efforts. Maureen, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, thanks for having us back. We were here last year about this time. We have a group of students that are from the Des Moines Metro. So they are involved in two different projects this year. One is through Iowa State University. It's the YES program. And the second project is it's a second year of this with Iowa Lakeside Labs. It's a partnership we have with the University of Iowa. These girls went up to Okoboji, and they're going to tell you all about what they did. So no further ado. I want to brag a little, okay? This is where we are as a district. We're looking at access and equity, and it's something that I'm really focused on doing in terms of the STEM Academy that we run and also these research opportunities. So on that slide that you're seeing to the left is the DMPS breakdown of ethnicity, and then to the right is who went with us up to these programs. We focus on equity, and this is not something that it's only for one group of kids. It's for anybody that is willing to dedicate some time in the summer. And you're going to hear these kids at Iowa State, 6 weeks, 40 hours a week easy, traveled up and back to Iowa State every day. They were assigned directly with a research scientist. They were in the lab, hooked into their research. Some kids had their own projects, but most of the kids, these were extensions of the existing projects. So I'm gonna let them tell you about their research, okay? We're gonna start off with Mai Dang. She is from Des Moines Hoover. Mai, are you ready to come up? And I just want you to read on that slide. This is what her group at the lab said about her. It was a pleasure performing research with Mai. She always put in 100% effort and was inquisitive, two important features of a scientist. We always knew she would come up with a good question at lab meetings. And there's Mai's poster, and she's going to talk to you about it.
So I worked with zebrafish over the summer with Dr. Sakaguchi, and he worked in the genetics and cell biology and development. So I worked with stem cells, and stem cells are they're like regular cells, but they have the potential to differentiate into other types of cells. And so stem cells are useful because they can reproduce really quickly. And for cancer cells, they also contain stem cells. So we're hoping to help find a way to isolate the cancer stem cells and find a way to cure it. Yep. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike.
So for my experiment, I actually did two experiments. One was just like with the stem cells and how it differentiated in two different temperatures. And then the other one, I used the zebrafish and then see how it worked in the two different temperatures. We did this because we can't experiment on humans, right? So we used zebrafish as our model because their yolks are easy to see through, so we can kind of easily see how the cells are developing. And then, well, the only problem with that is because the zebrafish, they live in a different temperature. So we had to find a good temperature to help develop the stem cells because the zebrafish live in a different temperature. And so we chose the temperature between our living potential, I guess, which was 34 degrees Celsius compared to the 37 degrees Celsius. And so what I did during the 6 weeks was I performed stem cells, and we used antibodies to track down the stem cells that were growing in the different temperatures. And we used 6 different antibodies. So on the graph on the right, you can see the results of the stem cells on each one. And you can see that most of the stem cells are glowing in both of them. But in the 27 degrees temperature, the higher temperature where we live at, there's kind of less. So that kind of says something that growing the stem cells in zebrafish might be totally different from what we expect, and that maybe using it, find out cancer cells, would be much more harder, so yeah. And then for the zebrafish, if you see the figure down below, it has a zebrafish. It kind of sees the development and how it went from the different temperatures, and that went pretty well because the fish look pretty similar, doesn't it? Yeah. So kind of the overall conclusion of the stem cells in the zebrafish, we found out that using the zebrafish was actually a pretty good model because you could see the eggs and stuff, and the temperature had not much of effects, except for a certain antibody, but we're gonna redo the experiment again to test and see if it works.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike.
Good job. That's amazing.
That was a lot to take
Explain
in.
that all to us again, because
I'm gonna be in 12th grade this year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, very impressive.
yeah, good job.
Thanks.
Next, we have Donald G., who's here from Central Academy. And Donald, come on up. Donald was, you can read for yourself that he was, worked in his lab. His work had to do with wetlands, and Donald will share with you about the wetland research.
Yep.
There you go.
So as she said, my name is Donald G., and so I'm going to try and condense my 6 weeks into 3 minutes. So I spent the 6 weeks of the summer working with Dr. William Crumpton and the PhDs and master's students in his lab on research about wetlands. Right now, wetlands, there's a big push as far as in state legislatures and national legislatures and all sorts of things to implement more wetlands into farmlands because as you can see in the slide, they're really, really important. They reduce nitrates, phosphorus. They are vital for a lot of different types of species. They're vital for our national bird, which is the bald eagle, and a lot of different animals and things. And they used to be very, very prevalent in Iowa and the Midwest. We're called the prairie pothole region for that purpose because there was a lot of wetlands, prairie pothole wetlands. But there was probably about 100 or plus years ago, there was a big push to reduce all the wetlands because Iowa was great cropland. And so we took them all out, and now we're trying to put them back in, which, that's how things go, cycle around. But so I was involved with doing research with greenhouse gases, so I helped people. They would put chambers on top of these wetlands, and they would measure how these wetlands contributed to greenhouse gases or how they reduced them. And then I also worked with vegetation studies, looked at different animals and all sorts of things. And so I spent about 3 weeks out in the field doing wetland research with the researchers and that sort of thing. And then I spent the other 3 weeks in the lab working on a computer and using ArcGIS software, which is a mapping software, and taking a wide variety of data from different graduate students, contractors, and others, and making maps like the one you see there of these wetlands to map the difference in a possible change in the shape of the wetland, and then also how the depth of certain species related to the prevalence. So at what depths could different species grow? So I learned a lot about different wetlands, and you can see a picture of a wetland there. And so their main purpose now, as you can see, they're surrounded by cropland, is to take in water from these tile drains. That there's massive amounts of tile drainage underneath Iowa cornfields and soybeans, and take in these the water from tile drains, and hopefully filter them. And so there's a lot of research being done to hopefully reduce the amount of phosphorus, nitrates, and things that contribute to Gulf epoxy and that sort of stuff.
Thank you. It's awesome.
Yeah. Good job. It's important stuff.
Donald's from Johnston, but he came to Des Moines because of our IB program.
Yeah.
Just another neat benefit of what we have to offer here is attractive to people around our metro area. So
Yeah. IB was great, by the way. If you have any questions, IB was awesome.
Display. Right.
Awesome.
Thank you.
thanks. And Delicio did not make it. We've been nip and tuck on a few of these people, and Trit just emailed me he couldn't make it. But Mishak is here from North High. Mishak, you want to join us? And Mishak was in a lab that worked with biofuels.
Oh.
Okay, I'm going to let him tell his story.
So the 6 weeks that we are at Iowa State, I was working under Dr. Nguyen and Ashik. Basically, our goal of the whole program was to find out which which carbon source, such as glucose, glycerol, cellulose, and yeast, would be beneficial for a specific bacteria called Clostridium P7, which of them would be better for to feed it and make the most biofuel. Now, the problem we're having with biofuels is that we can't make enough because we're running out of fossil fuels, so we need to make more. As we know, biofuels is good, and we need to make more to sustain. We can use biofuels in like gasoline, foods, and other stuff. So like we can make ethanol, acetic acid, butyric acids. So our goal was to see which carbon source, the ones I was talking about, which was glycerol, glucose, which one of those would basically feed the bacteria and make it produce more biofuels. As we were going on, we made some predictions. One of my predictions was glucose would be the better one because it's easier to consume and it's only a single cell organism, meaning that it's easier to consume. And then we did a couple experiments. We had to find out the OD and we had to put in a GC, which is the gas chromatography, to find out if my hypothesis came true. So week one was basically, each week we would do something new. So week one was glucose as we went on. Week two would be glycerol and so on. At the end of the week, we found out that glucose basically was the one that was perfect for the bacteria because it helped produce the most of the biofuels.
Excellent.
Thank you. Any questions?
It's
Very impressive,
going
Mishak.
to bacteria instead of algae. So it's new research and cutting edge of it.
Thank
You'll be a senior at North this year, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Good work. Good work.
Princess isn't here, but we've got 3 kids were invited from the STEM Academy to go up to Okoboji, sponsored with the University of Iowa. And interesting enough, the people who run this come from the University of Wisconsin, and there's like a triage. It's from California, Wisconsin, and Iowa City. Take our kids from Iowa up to Okoboji, and these 2 are going to tell you about it. I think this research has been going on for a long time, but they can tell you more about it. And here is their poster, kind of tough to read, but We've got Zwali here and Megan from the Academy.
Hi, my name is Zoli and I'm a BA senior at Hoover High School.
And I'm Megan, and I'm also going to be a senior at Hoover High School.
Go ahead.
So we spent 2 weeks at Lake Okoboji studying diatoms, which are single-celled algal organisms. But the difference between those and other algal cells is the fact that they have a cell wall of silica, which is pretty much glass. And so they're pretty interesting. And the fact that you can process a sample and do all of that, and you can still see the walls of this. You see a lot of different kinds too.
So our research was comparing the different genera of diatom in Salt Lake, Minnesota and West Lake Okoboji.
And so, as you know, Okoboji is not a salt lake. And so we were planning on finding different species in different areas, which is what we did find, but we found one very specific species called Ctenophora that we found was going to be a good indicator for the salinity in other lakes, and I think Zuali can say more about that because she researched more of that.
Okay, so Ctenophora, we found Ctenophora more in the Salt Lake, Minnesota, as you can see on the figure 5. Figure 5. It's with the red numbers and the blue. I don't know how you say it, but it's on the bottom, the lowest on the graph. It's an image of Ctenophora. We call it a dimension series. Basically, it's their birth to their death. So the larger they are, the younger they are, the smaller they are, the older the diatoms they are. So this Ctenophora, this specific diatom, it could be used as an indicator. So basically, if you go into West Lake Okoboji, where it's fresh water, and if you found Ctenophora there, then you can tell that the West Lake Okoboji, the lake, is getting, it's becoming salty.
Yeah, there's an increase in salt in that lake.
So that's why we could use Ctenophora as an indicator.
Excellent.
Anything else? Any questions?
Thank you.
Wow, great work.
That's fantastic.
Good work.
That's bad news, though. That means more nitrates in Lake Okoboji, but, that's what they're here for. I think one more thing I'd like to say is these kids from Iowa State competed against 70 other kids to get these spots. 10 kids from Des Moines got 10 of 20 spots. So really a big deal. And our girls that went up to Lake Okoboji, 50 kids competed for that place. And I think, how many were there, 8 or 9? 10, and we got 3 spots there. So our kids are competitive, they know what they're doing, and I think they're learning to speak the talk, and I think they're going to probably go and make our world a safer place. So thanks for having us, I appreciate it, and yes, you got a question.
When you're ready.
I think I'm ready, because look, that's black.
Well, the Iowa, or the laboratory in Okoboji is part of the state hygienic lab. I just wanted you to know that. So
good to know.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah.
This program is even bigger, and Heather can share. Her husband actually participated in the teacher end of our program up at Iowa State. We had about 7 teachers from Des Moines in another research experience where they were in labs. So this is a big partnership that makes our teachers better.
It's a lot of work, and it's
it's
worth it, yeah.
huge impact on kids. So thanks for having us.
Thanks, Maureen.
Maureen. All right, we'll move on to the consent items. We allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for up to 5 minutes concerning any agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, we ask that you sign in at the table up front. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid any reference to personalities or character attacks, as those types of comments serve no place in public discourse. A reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with the speaker regarding comments made to agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among board members and at the board table, with speakers' comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determinations as deemed necessary. Connie, are you on? Okay.
I'm ready.
Ms. Caldwell-Johnson, will you read the motion?
I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $9,049,277.78.
Is there a second?
Second.
A motion by Ms. Caldwell-Johnson, second by Ms. Anderson. Please vote. Connie, are you on the line? Okay. Motion passes 6-0. She voted yes. The record record that Ms. Boson voted yes.
She saw the agenda, so. Oh.
Next item on the agenda is item E1, public hearing for the infill of the pool at Central Campus. Hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item E1, public hearing for the infill for the pool at Central Campus? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board approve the proposed plans and specifications prepared by Raker Roads for the infill of the swimming pool at Central Campus.
I have a motion and a second to approve.
Motion?
Second.
Motion by Ms. Anderson, second by Ms. Caldwell-Johnson. Please vote. Connie, do you have you on the line? Okay, motion passes 6-0. Next item on the agenda is item F1, which is open enrollment appeal for denial. This is an action item, and I'll take a motion to approve the administration's recommendation to deny the open enrollment appeals.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Caldwell-Johnson, second by Ms. Ellsburn. Any discussion? All right. Ms. Langford.
Typically, I don't take these moments, but I don't know, just something. Wait, can we discuss actually the specifics of these cases? Are we
Yes.
allowed to do that?
Well,
Depends.
Don't
The
use
names
names.
are on there. What's
they're not public
what-
record, though.
That is executive content is what's attached,
Okay, so
right?
Right.
never mind. Never mind.
Depending on what, I mean, so just depending, I think depending on what it is you
What did
want
you
to
wanna say?
discuss.
On a very high level, we get a lot of appeals to stay within the district, and one of them happened to deal with bullying. Can I say that? Can I say that it was talking about bullying?
Sure.
Okay. I think it's interesting, particularly. I just wanted to go on the record saying, even though it was found in this instance to be unfounded, that as a district we don't endorse any sorts of bullying, and I think particularly with this political climate, we've been hearing lots of stories of students being bullied for a variety of reasons, including ethnic background and religion, and just to publicly state that as a district we don't condone any of those, any of that type of behavior from our students, and we want to create a climate where each of our students feel safe to study and learn and grow. So that's all.
Well said.
Well said.
All right. Seeing no further discussion, we have a motion and a second. Please vote. Motion passes 4-2. Next item on our agenda is item F2, which is the monitoring report 2.1 for treatment of students. We have a presentation, but before our presenters begin, this is an action item, so I'll take a motion to approve the monitoring report.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion by Ms. Ellsburn, second by Ms. Anderson. Turn it over to Tim and Jake.
Good evening, board. Hello.
Evening. Welcome.
Thank you, Ralph. We are here tonight to present Monitoring Report 2.1, Treatment of Students. You know me, Tim Schott, Secondary Schools Executive Director, but on my right is Jake Troja, who I believe you also know, who is our Director of School Climate Transformation. Great, correct, isn't it? Isn't it wonderful? And we'll be teaming up for this presentation, and you've gotten the report earlier this week. So let me first say it's a pleasure to serve, support, and supervise Jake and the entire Learning Services team. That's a new role for me here in the last year and a half, and we've done great work. He's done great work with the Learning Services group, and you'll learn a lot about that tonight.
I want to jump in here too. Is that okay?
Sure. More tag
I
team.
feel completely inadequate after the student presentations as well to be sitting here. Just throwing that out there.
Okay.
Those were amazing.
Those were amazing. So the interpretation is pretty important here because it's changed from last time to this time. So I'm going to go ahead and read it. With respect to interactions with students, the superintendent shall not cause or allow conditions or procedures that are inequitable, unfair, unsafe, untimely, undignified, or unnecessarily intrusive. If we can go to the data points, I'm going to use that arrow right there. Okay. What we tried to do for this report, and you'll hear a little more detail moving forward, is stick to the data points that you're familiar with, and in order to present them in as many years of a trend as we possibly could. But there will be a couple spots here where Jake in particular will allude to the direction we're going with data in future years that will allow a little more drill down. But I wanted to make sure that you understood the rationale for these data points in particular, and in keeping with what you've asked for. Additionally, I want to make sure that you understand that this is an all-student report on purpose. It's high level, global, and we've done that even more so this year than in prior years because we're going to have next board meeting a males of color specific demographic report that will have all of these same data points, but not at the global level, but instead very much drilled down, disaggregated, and discussed in terms of specific demographic groups. Overall, I also want you to know that this is an extremely positive report. The results in this report are almost all moving in the right direction, and you're going to be surprised about that if you've read the report very thoroughly, because some of them appear to not be headed in a positive direction. But as we explain why, I think you'll understand that even those are mostly good news. So we've tried to group the data points into categories, and I'll talk about those, and Jake will talk about some of those as we move forward. But the overall response really applies to all of them, and there are sort of two key points here that are important to know. The first is this is a backwards-looking report. It's lagging indicators that we're reporting on, and we're doing that on purpose. Again, we're going to talk about some of the leading indicators that we're going to have our access to in the future, but this is very much lagging, and it informs future action, and it also supports or negates some of the decisions we've made in the past. It also amplifies our need to focus on Tier 1, and you'll hear a whole lot about that. But the two specific investments, the overall responses, have to do with cultural proficiency and demonstration schools for rigor. And I know you know a great deal about the demonstration schools for rigor, and you know some about cultural proficiency focus, but I just want to highlight a couple pieces of the high-level cultural proficiency work that are part of the overall response. I believe you know that we've focused on the admin team for cultural proficiency work in previous years. We're now moving that this year very much into the teaching and staff ranks. We have 4 dates specifically where the entire district is going to stop shop and focus on cultural proficiency work at the building level. We also have modules. Isaiah has probably shared with you work from he and his team, which Jake's a part of, that have produced learning modules that will form the backbone for all our teaching staff. And some of you had the pleasure of attending our first ever Behavior Summit. And thank you if you were able to do that. But one of the themes that I hope that you noted from that summit was cultural proficiency was woven throughout it thoroughly on purpose. So that's overall response. Now we're going to talk about some of the groups. So the graduation data is a group of two data points. So as you've noticed, we've had a decrease in the 4-year graduation rate. And that is one of the truly disturbing data pieces for us that really is negative. So when I said they're almost all positive, when we talk about them thoroughly, this one is not positive when we talk about them thoroughly. The 4-year graduation rate decreased, as you can see, from 81 to 78. The 5-year graduation rate increased, so that's good news, meaning we're getting more and more students graduating eventually, just not more of them graduating in 4 years. And if you look at the 5-year trend from the last 3 years, you'll see that the overall graduation rate in 5 years truly is good news. A piece about the graduation rate, however, that was illuminating and was helpful, sometimes even in defeat or bad news or failure, there's something to be learned. And I would say that in this case, we learned a great deal about the root cause of the graduation rate as we disseminated and disaggregated that data and really looked at student-specific information about why the graduation rate went down. We learned that we had been focusing on undercreditedness with students and not focused on miscreditedness. Okay. The difference being, we determined that with that group of students, we had a large number of them who had enough credits to graduate, but they were not in the right courses. Yeah. And so that became key then to address that issue at the systemic level.
Your slides are not keeping up with your
my talking?
speaking.
How about that? Sorry.
That's what that nonverbal meant.
Thank you.
I was trying to.
Just maybe.
They're saying, push the button, Tim. Push the button. Thank you. Jake, you can just grab.
You want me to do that?
No.
Okay.
You do it. Oop. Sort of. Because of that, we'll talk about the specific approach, the response to that data point. But I think we have a thorough response as a result of really digging into that failure. The dropout rate, however, continues to decline, which is good. That's exactly what we want to see happen. So overall, the response to the graduation data is, as I've mentioned, an investment in this notion of supporting academic planning. We've developed a district-wide academic planning team, and we've already taken steps to hire 12 additional counselors at the high school level. We've worked with our technology department and others to infuse technology into this work so we can monitor students' academic plans at a level that we were never able to before, beginning with 8th grade when they developed their 4-year academic plan, and then having the ability to monitor that all throughout their high school career and have their parents have the ability to monitor that as well, which was also a difficult piece. And then we have and will invest in professional development for counselors and administrators on district-wide course offerings to make sure that our students are fully aware of all the offerings available to them, and that we significantly reduce the miscredited students. And we've actually gone through with every single student, rising senior, and studied them specifically district-wide and know exactly where every rising senior is regarding their miscreditedness. and have worked with our increased counseling staff and our academic planning team to ensure that their fall schedule addresses their miscreditedness. And that's a level, quite frankly, of detail that we did not have the ability or, honestly, the staff levels to do. And so we've strategically invested in that for the upcoming years.
It's my turn.
It is.
Okay. I'm not sure if my narrative will be as good as Tim's, but we have level 2 plus office referrals, which refers to level 2, 3, and 4 office referrals. You'll see that there's a ginormous increase of about 16,000 referrals. And on the surface level, that would be troubling. You'd think that from last year to this year, our kids' behavior got worse. But I will tell you that we've narrowed the variance in our buildings as far as how things are documented and what is documented, so that number is more an accurate depiction of what we believe is currently happening in our schools. And so even though it looks huge, we've also rearranged the way that level referrals were done and distributed throughout the district. So before, we had an elementary handbook that was K-5, and we had a middle school K-9 or 6-9, and then we had a high school, and every level had a different level of referral. So if you were in elementary school and you had this type of behavior, it became a level 1 referral. I'll give you an example. Minor physical contact, which is in the discipline code. If I hit or kick somebody because I'm frustrated, that would be a level 1 referral, and that's what would go in as a category, especially in elementary school. It'd just go in as level 1. We didn't really know what that meant. It just was a level 1 referral. And so we created a continuum of referrals from level 1, 2, 3, and 4 that was K-12. So we have an agreed upon definition of what the referrals are. And in addition to that, we created subcategories that define kind of problem behavior in each one of those levels referrals that we took out of the discipline code. So that way, if I'm at Stowe versus Finley and I kick somebody, it gets documented a very similar way, so that as our students move around or our teachers, work with each other, we know exactly what we're talking about when that happens. So with that, every time that minor physical contact occurred in elementary school, it was written as a level 2 this year, where previous years it was written as level 1, mostly because they're 7, or it was the first time, or we don't know the context. And so we're trying to get down to what is the behavior that's occurring, what's documented accurately, so we know what the problems we need to address. Instead of, we want less level 2s. And so now we can name, by name, say specifically what that behavior is. So we saw the biggest increase was in elementary school. So I would say that almost 90% of the increase here is contributed to elementary schools and changing the way the referrals have been aligned. We had a decrease in referrals in high school and secondary schools, but specifically in high school, and I think we stayed the same in middle school, but because of the arrangement that we saw a huge jump. So I know that on the surface you may have saw that, but some points that, let me just preview the next slide here real quick, that make sure we talk, is that we also had a decrease of the number of students that received a level 2 or higher. So even though referrals went up by 16,000 referrals, we had a reduction in the number of students that displayed level 2 or higher negative behavior. So I guess what does that mean? It means that we had fewer students with this type of behavior. We know that for sure. What we do know is that when we had a behavior, we accurately documented it. Is this a good time for questions, or should I forge on through?
I have a question.
Please.
So is the data, obviously you can tell, I'm a teacher at school A, you can tell how many referrals that I'm submitting.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of support do you give teachers? And you can maybe tell, maybe I've submitted 20 or something crazy.
Sure.
But
I think just your question, I just want to kind of align philosophically. So when we document something, we're saying that we have created conditions for that behavior to occur. So we have to own the responsibility. So when that happens, we're not saying a high number of referrals equals a bad school or a bad kid or a bad teacher. What we're saying is we have not created conditions that are conducive for learning for that student. So the response to that would be, what do we need to change in the environment? What do we need to change in our approach? What support do I need to provide either that teacher, new learning, or that student to reduce the levels, the referral writing? So that's really is now a critical data point where we look at that, instead of saying we just want less of something, We can say that this student is having more referrals. We haven't done an appropriate response. And I'll give you an example. Inappropriate language is a level 1. And so the question is, we used to have this process. If you wrote so many level 1s, you become a level 2 referral, and then it'd become a level 3 referral. Well, it doesn't really make sense if the intensity of the behavior is always the same, like I casually cuss in class or inappropriate like that. So that still remains a level 1. So let's say the student cusses on Monday and then on Wednesday, and we document that. What that's telling us is our response to that student is not appropriate, not that their behavior has gotten worse. It's mean that we haven't done anything to change the behavior. So to kind of respond to that, our question we would ask ourselves is, what do we need to do to change student behavior?
Right, and I wasn't inferring it was a bad teacher or a bad
No,
school.
yeah.
I just wondered what kind of support.
Absolutely.
Obviously.
I just want to make sure that when I respond to that, that made sense. Go ahead. Yeah, Ms. Langford.
Just on this particular slide, I have a few questions. And the first one is, I'm still not clear, Jake, what a level 2 plus referral is, or what the differences are between those.
I will gladly explain it. So we have 4 levels of referral.
Okay.
Level 1 would be like a teacher response. So that behavior simply requires a response from a teacher, and that's based on the intensity or the duration of the behavior. A level 2 would require a response from an administrator or an office designee. So we would say that it would require a little bit more support. Could be a counselor responding. It could be, the designee, whoever that is in the building. It could be lots of folks. But the office has a plan for that behavior when it happens, not just the teacher is on their own. And level 3 would be, the office has to have a response to that. So an administrator responds to that type of behavior. So if we use the inappropriate language as a level 1, the teacher has to have a response. Level 2 would be, I'm trying to think of what we call the category, but a more intense behavior, then there should be a plan for that. And then a level 3 would be a threat, is what we have. And so the admin has to have a response to that. And the level 4 would be the highest level, which is an expulsionary type of offense. And there's very few. I think we have 6 categories for type of behaviors, and that might be an assault, as an example. Possession of a controlled substance with distribute, intent to distribute.
Okay.
So that's how they're aligned. So they're based on the intensity of the behavior.
Okay. And then within those level 2 and 3s, are there certain behaviors or that you see more of? Or is there like a trend in the types of behaviors you're seeing within those 2s and 3s?
That's a great question. Previous to this year, we couldn't answer that question. All I could say is that we had 33,431 level 2s last year. That's the only thing I could tell you. I could tell you who they came from, and I could tell you how many they had and what school had, but I couldn't tell you what they meant or what we were supposed to do about it, besides we just wanted less. So this year, I can tell you specifically where we see the biggest discrepancy, and our highest level 2 referral right now is major defiance. So now I can call it by name and say, okay, what does that mean? Well, it's an interpreted behavior. It's my interpretation of a student's behavior, so we can address that. Where before, we just... all we could do is say that student has 57 level 2 referrals and we need to have less. And so now we can actually address the behavior and track it and make sure that we're doing something about it. So absolutely.
Okay.
And not just what it was, but where it was.
Yes.
What time of day it was. Which teacher wrote the referral, so we can really drill down now and then address.
Jake, can you speak to the importance? I wanted you to hit the importance of why the more consistency in how we're documenting behavior at elementary can be much more helpful in that transition into middle school and from middle school to high school.
Yeah. Well, we just talked about our graduation rate, and we know that the biggest predictor is our attendance by 3rd grade and 4th grade, how students attend school, how their academic achieves in elementary school, and what their behavior looks like. And behavior is a part of that puzzle, that tripod of things we look at for dropout rate, attendance, academic performance, and behavior. So for us to be able to accurately document what it looks like in elementary school, not only about mobility, not only about being consistent from building to building, but allowing us to distribute resources appropriately. So we don't know where we distribute resources if we just know we're basing it off by the number of referrals. But now we can specifically look at what is the problem behavior that we need to deal with. It guides our professional development as far as administrators to principals to teachers. And allows us to better make a transition from 5th grade to 6th grade if we know exactly what interventions we deployed in elementary school, because we know specifically what the behavior we were intervening was. We can track and see if it made a difference. And then as he transitioned to 5, 6, we can continue that success. It's just a better predictor, K-12, how we can work as a one system. And before, when a student would show up to middle school, depending on where they went to elementary school, we didn't really know what that meant. We'd have to call the counselor and say, what does this mean? Or the principal and say, what does it mean when this happened? I see that you resolved this. We'd have all this dialogue instead of now I can just look at it and it tells me exactly what occurred and what didn't occur.
I have a couple follow-up
Please.
questions. I wasn't through, but
Go ahead.
should I
Anybody?
wait? Should I hold? I can hold.
Hold on a second. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I do have a few questions, but if you have more, go ahead.
I'll wait. Maybe you will address some of them.
Why don't we do that,
Okay.
Natasha?
Okay, I believe him. Going back a little bit real fast to the number of counselors that were brought in. Apologize, I know it's going back a little bit further. I was wondering how that was determined, where the counselors went. Was it based on population or need or?
Yeah, I can answer that. Counseling falls in learning services, which is my department. So we looked at several things. One is risk factors. So the buildings with the highest at-risk students for dropout is how we looked at. We funded the additional counselors by funding every counselor 25% through at-risk dropout prevention dollars, which allowed them, us to expand services, provide more core instruction, but also do targeted intervention around attendance. So using historical data for the last 5 years, we looked at the most at-risk students by percentage in the building. And I kind of created an algorithm that allowed us to see from highest to lowest at-risk building. And then we saw that our secondary schools obviously had the most students. But looking at the ratio of counselors to students, that was where we were the worst off. We were about 750, to 1. And the state recommends around 250, 300. So we were able to get that down to about 420. We're not satisfied with that, but that's why we started there. And knowing where we were with graduation rate, knowing that debacle that we have to solve with miscredited, uncredited, we need our counselors to play a vital role in that process. So that's why we chose secondary schools, a lot of high school and middle school.
One thing I would add too, there was I won't say an intentional reduction in counselors previous to the last, I guess, 3 years ago or so. But what we really tried to do was parse out really what are the expectations of our guidance counselors and limit what we asked them to do to guidance counseling for which they were trained. Oftentimes in the past, guidance counselors ended up taking on sort of every odd and end that there wasn't anybody else to do. And the same can sort of be said for social workers to some degree as well. What we're trying to do, and we've started this work a few years ago, and Jake's really helping refine it, is making sure that we're, that what we're asking social workers to do is what they're trained to do, and what we're asking guidance counselors to do is what they're trained to do. And if we need mental health therapists, then we have mental health therapists to do that, so that we're not just stretching people too thin, but also not asking them to do things for which they're really not trained, or that they didn't think they signed up to do. So we can be more specific about that,
right,
and have people do what people really think they're supposed to be doing.
One thing I'll add is we added another support person to support the additional counselors, and so we have 3 district level coordinators that are 12-month employees that help the counselors. We're close to the 90 counselors currently in the district. And obviously, if you do the math, when we get to 1 to 300, we need about 100, 110 to get to that ratio. So as we see that increasing, we did add more support to ensure that those teams, especially at high school where you have 5 or 6 counselors, are functioning well.
I still have.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
That's fine.
You folks are welcome to ask as many questions as they want. I'll note that we're not halfway through this presentation yet, though.
Sure.
I can save one until the end.
Why don't we do that?
We're gonna hold? Sorry.
Yep, hold.
Okay.
And
yeah.
Why don't you move through and...
Sure. In addition to that, we're going to the bullying slide. There we go. I just have to hit it harder. Right. Again, you'll see there's an increase in the number of founded events. So founded means there was an investigation that was done. The investigation concluded that it violated the law of Iowa. which there's 4 criteria for that. So we saw that there was an increase of 10. Again, that isn't a predictor of a bad school or a bad student. What it does tell us is that we haven't created conditions conducive for those students. And I think that an increase of 10 out of 33,000 kids is pretty minute. Just allowed us to document that better. I predict that we'll see that continue to go up as we continue to investigate and document things appropriately. And this is bullying's a very interesting thing to find. And I'll say that because if you've read the law, what it does say is we investigate when the perception of the victim matches the criteria. And then we find it when our perception of the investigation matches the perception of the victim. So it's all about how we see things happening and how the student sees things happening in the context of everything, of all our biases. So it's a very difficult thing. So I just want us to be careful when we look at this data point. It is part of the picture, should be part of the data picture when I'm looking at my school and saying, if I see 5 or 6 founded cases, what does that tell me about the conditions in which kids are learning on or learning in? And one of the biggest factors to decrease bullying is not bullying prevention. The research currently shows that bullying prevention increases the number of students that bully because now we just taught them how to do it. But one of the biggest decreases is paying attention to the social structure of which kids operate in. So if at a high school I pay attention to how kids socially interact with each other, and I pay attention in the middle school, that if the social group does not allow bullying to occur, then it won't. And so that's one of the biggest factors that we focus on is, are you paying attention to the social dynamics within your school? And what are those social dynamics dictating that the group do? As we know that peers have a greater influence on behavior than we do. So as we continue to investigate and get a plan together, I foresee that we'll continue to see that number to get higher. I don't know, I can't even guess what a number we would say that this means good. I'm not even sure you could tangibilize that. Gotcha. Got me. So a couple things is I also oversee the Culture and Climate Transformation Grant, which is a federal grant. We're entering our 3rd year here in October. But a few things that I want to make sure that we talk about is we do develop a consistent K-12 behavior reporting system, which I discussed a little bit earlier. I think if you remember to the last board presentation, we had that little work time over here. I showed you some of the visualizations that we're able to do, very specific, so teams can get down to very specific things, and that was through this work. It's very accurate. It's down. I mean, you can answer a lot of questions: who, what, when, where, why, by sub-pop, special ed 504, if they're on the football team, if they're part of the case management, if they happen to be a community partner and an athletic team, does that mean you have an increase or a decrease likely to get a referral or not? So we can answer a lot of good questions. Every school has a team that is looking at their Tier 1 behavior instruction. Every school, as we discussed a little bit last time here, is looking at our multi-tiered behavior framework and implementing a K-12 district-wide system on how we instruct behavior district-wide for the first time this year. We're starting our Tier 2, so we talk about core instruction should meet about 80% of kids' needs, and then beyond that, we need to provide support. So this fall and then this coming winter, we'll have schools that'll work towards Tier 2. And then, we're already planning 2017 Behavior Summit, which I'm not sure if you knew or not, we had almost 1,100 educators from Des Moines Public Schools attend that event, and we had close to 200 external folks attend that event, which was a really good shot in the arm for us to kick off the school year. All right, Tim's up. Well, I can talk about suspensions a little bit.
Yes,
I'll go for it.
I'll talk about expulsions.
So we did have a reduction in suspensions, which is great. We know that as we work with our buildings and work with our high school and secondary folks where we see a lot of suspension from, we know that the data suggests strongly that suspension does not equate change of student behavior. We have to have better tools for that. So we're working on that. There's a couple specific examples that we'll talk about towards the end of this presentation, but we know that suspension is not an intervention. It doesn't necessarily teach anything, and it necessarily doesn't restore a relationship that was broken somewhere within the building. So we're continuing to reduce that, but the responsibility to help schools do that is on us. We have to provide some options that are better than suspension, and that's our job to do that.
And the same theory of action applies for expulsions. some of you know, we were averaging about 13 expulsions a year. And the truth is, it's not instructive for the students, and in studying the outcome for those students, it was disheartening, to say the least. And because we totally own whether or not we're going to expel a student to the street, we came up with a better plan. And you'll see the data went from 12 and 13, 14 to 0 and then to 0 because we started a deferred expulsion process, which had several benefits, the greatest of which is it kept students in school and transferred students to Scavo High School with a very specific support and intervention plan in place for them, which held them accountable. It also allowed us to have access to them so we could support them, because quite frankly, what would happen when we expelled them to the street is we didn't have any access to them at all, and we couldn't hold them accountable or support them. So the result from now 2 years of utilizing deferred expulsion when we feel we could, which in this case happened to be every time, has been that those students, we've had a couple graduates, all students are still in school, and we have not actually lost any of them to a dropout. So that's been very successful, and we're going to continue with it. And I will throw in a piece of data, again, to sort of support the notion that behavior is not getting worse. So bullying numbers go up, founded bullying numbers go up, level 2 and above numbers go up, but behavior in the district is actually not getting worse. And another data point to that point is that the expellable offenses that had averaged around 13 for the previous 5 or 6 years, we were at 6 or so this year. We were at 5 or 6 the year before. So we don't have an increase even in the student behaviors that qualify to be expelled. We actually have a reduction in those behaviors, which mirrors some of the other data points that Jake presented.
And Tim, if I may, would you share, because you know the details more clearly than I do, but it may have been the last expellable offense that happened, I believe it was at Lincoln, and your conversation with Lincoln, which to me really speaks to the culture changing in the district.
Yeah, I will.
I will.
So
what I'm referring to.
We had talk about progress. So we had a situation, I mean, think about this. We've gone from, we need these students to not be in school anywhere in the state of Iowa, because that's what expulsion does. You cannot attend school in any district in the state of Iowa, to this example at Lincoln where Lincoln staff, it was an expellable offense, and they actually reached out to me and to Jake and said, you know, here's the situation with this student. There's some mitigating factors here. We'd actually like to keep him in the building and do the deferred expulsion supports right here at Lincoln. Beautiful. That's lovely. And so we did that. It worked out great. He was a senior, graduated. It all worked out fine. And think about just a few years back, our response would have been completely different, and the likelihood of that student finishing school would have been very slim. I think 20% of our students were graduating out of the 5 years previous. Is that the story you wanted me to tell? Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
Talk about that?
Sure. So one of the things we don't focus on is when we talk about exclusionary practices is loss of instructional time. What I mean by that is in the classroom when students are asked to take a time out, take a break, to lose some type of instructional time piece, whether that's through suspension, in school or out of school as well. And so we do have this year for the first time a system that tracks the amount of minutes that students have lost because of our intervention to their behavior, which is an interesting data point. When we start making goals around reducing lost instructional time, which we know will then increase instructional time, but it also takes the emphasis away from what the student did wrong to what can we do to change outcomes for that kid. So we'll have the opportunity to do that this year through, one, having a common definition of how we write referrals, but also common definitions on what resolutions to those referrals are. So when we say time out of class, or we say detention, or we say suspension, they mean the same thing, which previous to this year, every building kind of used those how they saw fit to resolve the referral. We're moving towards restorative justice professional development, which means looking at value relationship, which we all do, but in addition to valuing high supports and high accountability for students. And so just to kind of give you a brief I can dig into that later if you have questions about what that means. And I know you do. We're also asking schools to develop a continuum of response. So let me give you an example. A lot of schools historically have a matrix response. So this behavior happens and this is what you get because of that behavior. We're challenging that theory, saying that if every student that had that behavior, let's take an example, well, the highest level 2 is major disruption in class. So your disruption gets this when you come to the office. When we do that, we're assuming that every variable in every context and even the function of that behavior is the same. And that's not true. And so we're asking schools to have a continuum response to when a student does have this behavior, have some options instead of the matrix approach. So that's what that continuum means. We're looking at SAP, which is a program that we've had in the district for a while that's very underutilized. And here's an example of one of the levers that we're trying to develop for schools when it comes to having possession of a substance, a controlled substance, whether that be drugs or alcohol. Is we propose to SAP to come up with an alternative to suspension for students that come to the school under the influence or have possession. What can they immediately respond to when the school says, I have a student that is intoxicated right now, what do we do? And historically, we would suspend them to their parents out of school, come up with a plan to provide restrictions without instruction, and then bring them back. And so we're asking SAP to come to the table as a partner and say, you're the medical professional, you're the experts in substance abuse, what can we do when a student shows up? So there's an example of how we're trying to create some options for schools. And we'll continue the deferred expulsion process.
On to attendance.
Mine's not displaying, but why don't you speak to that one?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, sort of. I know it got better.
It did get better.
Mine's not displaying on my computer.
Average
But
daily attendance.
our average daily attendance did increase, which is great. We also looked at, and then just a way to break this down and track attendance, which is the leading cause of dropout, is the number of buildings or the percentage of buildings that had 96 or plus higher attendance. I believe we went from around 20% last year to somewhere around 65% this year. Is that exactly correct?
15.7 to 62.7.
Right. So we have a huge emphasis and push on attendance. We know that, again, that's the number one cause for students to drop out of school. So we have a full court press with our counselors, with JCSLs. We're aligning what they're doing. We're aligning what our attendance teams are doing in the building. We're aligning that with our success case managers, which are our social workers in the building. We're aligning that with our attendance plan to make sure that students attend school, and we have appropriate interventions to that attendance to continue to increase that.
Yep. And some of that's summarized here.
Oh, there it is. Thank you. And we also just put out a huge RFI, request for information to the community. We put some at-risk dollars behind this RFI and asked the community to say, what can you do to help us increase K-3 attendance? We want to support that initiative. We want to increase attendance. We know that we can't do it by ourselves. We know that many hands make like light work. So we have an RFI out right now to the community to say, how can you help us increase K-3 attendance? I talked about the JCSLs, which is the juvenile court liaisons. They're going to be looking with truancy court, but also prevention to that in high schools. Counselors are going to continue to focus on chronic absenteeism, which is students that miss 10% or more of their daily attendance. And our success staff will work on students for the first 30 days, which if you kind of look at that picture, we see students that first 30 days is one initiative, looking at chronic absenteeism is another, and then looking at students that are beyond chronic so we're trying to hit that in all different aspects for attendance.
Now to perception.
Okay, Gallup poll. So this data is baseline. I know we've said that before, but they've also changed the poll before. So the poll was changed. So we can look at this data, and then in October, we'll take the Gallup poll again, and we'll see what that says. And I just want to kind of give a little background information about the Gallup poll, but it is one piece of the puzzle that kind of tells us what conditions we are creating for kids. It's definitely not a determinant. I tell you that the Gallup would even tell you that. But as far as how we compare to national average, we are slightly below the national average, not significantly. 0.2 would be significant in Gallup's eyes, but we are below the national average for that. Couple things. perception data. We are looking at creating intentional community partners to ensure that, we have great MOUs with our partnerships, that they're doing good work with our kids. We're going to participate in the Iowa Youth Survey, which, if you're not familiar with, gets at a different thing than Gallup. Gallup is more a litmus test, and Iowa's Youth Survey is more of a screener when you talk about at-risk behaviors with drug and alcohol, even suicide risk. And so it looks at that. So it kind of gives us a bigger picture. And we're also looking for participation in Gallup's parent poll. So what do parents think, and how do they feel about their students in their school? So just to give us a better picture of how we're doing.
So I hope that overall you're feeling very positive about this report and certainly excited about some recent results, but even more excited about the direction that we're headed with Jake at the lead here, being driven by that national grant. What questions do you have for us?
I have some.
Ms. Anderson?
Earlier you mentioned, sorry, I'm going to go back because we went forward.
Yep.
You mentioned cultural proficiency with the administration team. When did that happen? How much did they get? And because I don't remember that.
Yeah, so last year, cultural proficiency work was embedded in every time we were with leaders, with school principals and their admin teams, because we expanded our principal meetings used to include just principals.
Okay.
Last year, they included principals and their leadership team members to broaden the net, and that was very effective. And so we interwoven cultural proficiency to every single time we were with them. My point about that was that the focus last year was on the admin team, not teachers. So what we didn't do last year that we're going to do this year is work site-specifically with the building staff.
Okay. Okay, and then, let's see. You said you had 3 district office employees supporting the counselors?
Yes, I can talk about that.
Okay.
So we had...
I guess.
How?
Yep.
That's a great question.
Pretty broad, sorry.
And that's okay. So prior to me coming to this position, so Director of School Climate means overseeing learning services, which I can describe what that is, but counseling falls in that category, K-12 behavior, activities, before and after school care, community partnerships, everything that kind of comes in that conditions for schools to operate in. And so we had somebody that supervised counseling prior, and then she left the district recently to a different job. And so in her departure, instead of creating another support, a supervisor, I created another position that directly supports buildings. So we just reduced this central office supervisor and added a third person to support those counselors. And their number one job is to make the best counselors in the school. So I want them to spend more than 60 to 70% of their time in the building with the counselors, just like a teacher coach would with teachers. They're going to do the same thing with counselors, looking at are they reaching 100% of their students with their curriculum? Is their curriculum aligning K-12? Are they doing targeted intervention correctly? We're talking about master levels folks. This is their thing. This is what they do. So they're going to help those teams when there's teams of people doing that right work. And so and then they have some system stuff that they do. They do a lot of the grade checks. They do a lot of the alignment of courses and prerequisites and that kind of work.
Did you say 3 employees or a third?
So we had 3 people that supervised counseling, but one was a supervisor, and then we had 2 people that actually deployed to schools.
Okay.
When that supervisor left,
Okay.
I had all three of them support schools. And so we've kind of took a ratio of like 1 to 50 and divide now to about 1 to 30 that they support.
And then, so if a school's needs support, would they potentially give some training or
Absolutely,
or
yeah.
provide PD or
For sure.
Okay.
Depending on what that would be. So their 2 main emphases is social emotional health and well-being, and then college career readiness.
Okay, and then do you have teams at the schools, behavior teams made
Yes.
up of teachers, admin?
Yeah.
I know you used to, but do they get to see the data?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we reference them as tier 1 teams in the report. So
Okay.
every school has a tier 1 team and a lead, and then myself, and then I have a coordinator for the grant. We have a direct tie to those leads and those teams. We have ongoing professional development throughout the year. This year we'll have 20 hours of PD just for core instruction, specifically around cultural proficiency, restorative justice and just better interventions to behavior.
Okay, and then have you, or do you engage with like organizations like AMOS? I mean, I know that they're in the schools, but do you ask them to give like their perspective? Because you said sometimes it's hard, like with the bullying, like, you know, it's hard to gauge. Would that be something that might be helpful?
I think
Bringing an outside?
Absolutely. To investigate specifically? Is that what you're asking?
To give their perspective, I guess.
We do engage with Amos, and we're using them, and obviously they've got great feedback and thoughts and initiatives, and we're using them specifically in mediation support for middle schools.
Yeah.
I think Jake is stumbling because I think he's hearing you say, should they investigate bullying?
No,
And
I don't think they
he's
should
saying, no, I don't
investigate.
think so.
You're right. Absolutely not.
But just maybe, no, I don't think they would be qualified to do that, but they could they give their perspective, or?
So they would be a
I
perfect
guess.
way to describe what they could do is they're a part of that continuum of response. So when we have this type of behavior occur, or we need some support for instruction, they would be part of that continuum. And that's what we're asking our community partners, and they're a partner, to say, how else can you help us? Because we can't do this by ourselves. And so I think one of the biggest impacts is us getting on the same page of what do we need, and then asking our community partners to help with that.
And just one more little
Yeah,
tiny
please.
one. So you mentioned restorative justice.
Yes.
Are you training the staff with?
We haven't gone down that path yet. We're going to get there probably in December, February. And I say probably because we're unpacking cultural proficiency with all of our Tier 1 teams. I'm not sure how fast or slow that's going to go. But our first objective is in September to kind of get some of our main players across the district trained. We'll have about 45 people trained in September over a couple different facets. One is the philosophical approach to that, looking at relationships, looking at circles or some of the tools they use, and then we'll start working with teams on that. But I think the reason we haven't done that yet this year is we need folks to philosophically decide that's what they need to do.
And are you currently using the PBIS system in some of the schools? Because that's kind of
Sure.
different than.
It is, and we're going to split hairs on this, but that's okay. PBIS is a framework. So we absolutely are stealing a lot of ideas from that research because they have a ton of research, they have a ton of resources. We have a framework for Des Moines Public Schools because we needed to own it as a district, and we've used a lot of the same research. Even our technical assistants for the grant is Tim Lewis from the University of Missouri, and he's a national expert on PBIS. He writes the Missouri PBIS training, and he meets with us, multiple times throughout the school year. So yes, the answer is yes. But would we be a PBIS district? No.
Well, what I'm saying is, to me, PBIS and restorative justice seem to be different philosophically.
Well, sort of. I mean, I guess I don't know what you know about how PBIS is framework, but one of the aspects of PBIS is responding to inappropriate behavior, and that's where restorative comes in. Your response is what we're talking about when we say restorative.
I think, to me, I don't know, and obviously I'm not an expert, but occasionally it seems to me to reward, to have lots of rewards.
Yeah, that's a piece of it, absolutely. So acknowledging when kids get it right, and we're talking, restorative is not only about that, but it's about when the kids don't get it right, what do you do?
Right.
And that's what we're trying to get better at. I think we do a good job. Well, I wouldn't say that. We do an okay job acknowledging when kids get it right, which is one piece of the puzzle. But we know that research suggests it's better when you do both. So acknowledge when kids get it right and have an intervention when behavior is incorrect. And so we're trying to have better interventions on the backside as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Deanna.
I recognize that we still have a couple very meaty things to talk about, but I think there's a couple things in this presentation I really do want to get some clarification around. The first being, so I did have the opportunity to attend the Culture and Climate Conference on the second day. I was very impressed, and I got to see Brian Mendler and his presentation. He was actually talking a lot about teacher response and the referral process. This is not a finger-pointing question. I just want to clarify. So we had 16,000 more referrals take place this year than last. But you mentioned you saw the trend in elementary schools. You also mentioned that a majority of those tend to be major defiance. And you said that the number of students being referred has not increased. So what that leads me to believe is that it's not the number of students being referred isn't increasing, but the
students who are being referred are having an increase in how many times they're being referred.
Correct.
Is that a correct?
That's correct.
So my question is, based on the data then, because this is awesome that we're collecting so much data, and we can pinpoint and really hone in now. So excited to hear that. What do you think's happening?
What I think happening is we're trying to figure out exactly what the picture is. You know, before when we had 36,000 referrals, that didn't tell us anything. And so we have to have a clear picture of what's happening before we can do something. And I'm glad you got to see Brian. Brian brings a great teacher perspective to, you know, behavior. And one of the things he talked about is, you know, don't write the 57th referral or the 58th referral. And I agree with Brian, but the premise of his statement is around if you haven't done anything about it. And that's what we're trying to get to, is if we document a referral, it doesn't mean that you're a bad kid. It just means that we have to do something different. That behavior is information. And so that's one statement that Brian makes that I wish he would say, don't write it if you haven't tried to do something different. I would never tell our staff not to document when behavior occurred, because that just tells us what we're doing isn't working. We have to do something different. So we have a more accurate picture with that number. So does that mean that we documented more times for those kids? It does. I have to go back and compare our level 1 referrals. And here's the problem with changing that. I don't know how many of those level 2s that we changed. There was 2 major categories. One of them was elopement from class in the elementary school.
Elopement?
Yeah, like leaving class without permission.
Got it.
Which is level 2. And the other one was the physical touching or minor physical contact. Those are the 2 leading ones that really changed in elementary school, because they were documented as level 1s before because the response is very low intense. But the reason we wrote them as level 2 is because they're pretty an intense behavior no matter where you are. And so I don't know how many were like that previous years. We don't have any idea. We just know that there was that many level 2s. And so now that we know, I can go to a school and say, you know, let's look at what your level 2s are and what are you doing about that. And when we say level 2 or higher, that includes a bunch of different data points. So yes, on the surface, again, 16,000 looks like a lot, and those kids got more referrals, which is absolutely true.
Do we know how many kids that was?
Yes.
And we don't need it right now. Just
I do.
sorry, but I'm just
Yep.
just trying to speak to that. Just trying to get to your thoughts on what that trend is, and then our response to that, which you laid out some of the, but with that particular
So I would hope that we would see, eventually see less referrals, obviously. That means we're making progress. But I would want to look at it in a different way and say, what's the percentage of students that have not received a level 2 or higher, which we're going to get to. And we know that tells us if our instruction is working. Because we're always going to have students. There's always outliers in students and in buildings if there's a high number of referrals. But if we know the number of kids that have 0 to 1 office referred behaviors, we know that is a good number. So last year we had 84.36% of kids with 0 or 1 level 2 or higher. So that tells us in general that our behavior instruction worked. It's a better indicator. I would hope to see that increase. Whether or not referrals go to 100,000 referrals and we have 90% of kids in that 0 to 1 range, what that's telling me is our instruction got better. So the referrals on a standalone point doesn't necessarily mean anything besides diagnostic to what I need to do. It doesn't indicate good or bad. Does that make sense? So what does indicate good or bad is the number of kids that don't have one, or our increased in graduation rate, or our achievement data, because we know that behavior is a good predictor of student achieving. So it's hard to single it out in this report and say that this means something good or this means something bad. But if you look at the totality of all the data points together, we can make a pretty good guess of how things are going. So if I look at that report, I would say we currently are meeting the needs of our students with that instruction.
Sure, and definitely several good things to see, which I mentioned in that email to you all.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, that's kind of a split hair answer, but I just want to make sure that we're clear on that response.
Okay, I can save my other question for another time.
Okay, I'm going to try to get through this really quickly. First off, love the data collection, have been since we began talking about it. Really do appreciate it. As everyone knows, I love my data. So, and I think it's great in how you're using it. However, going along with that, there's always kind of that flip side, like tracking a student. Is there anything that you're aware of to make sure that tracking of students don't happen? and like you said, you can look at the behaviors specifically at the schools, but kind of maybe add a more global aspect
Sure.
if there's something that would trigger kind of a question.
I know what you mean by tracking, and in a behavioral way, it's very difficult because we don't have a whole lot of systems that students go to when they have, behavior. There's a few things. You go to special ed, we refer you to special ed, or we look at AEP in middle school, high school. So by tracking, is that what you mean? Like, what do you
No,
mean?
not quite. Well, just like you had mentioned, some students are going to be repeating the offenses, and that we're all human and we all kind of wake up and maybe have a certain perception of someone in our lives, and just trying to avoid that. And if someone else saw that particular student's information and just kind of gets that perception already put in there about that particular student.
Sure.
So I know you kind of touched on it, but more of a abstract way of identifying to making sure that there's buffers, that doesn't happen.
So I'm not sure how to respond to that statement or question, but let me try to do my best I can what you're talking about. If I can rephrase, are you asking, are we looking at how teachers are interpreting the referral data, and are they making prejudices based on that data? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, how does it, like Terry said, how does it follow a kid?
I think that, absolutely. It absolutely follows a kid. It's a part of their academic, history. I think where we're turning the boat a different direction is philosophically, what does that mean? And what it means is our response was not appropriate to that student previously. And so with that, we have a lot of buffers in place as far as when kids get additional services and how they get services and what that looks like. So we're able to ask with the data question specifically what that looks like. When do they go to tier 2? When do they get referred to special education? When do we look at AEP? So all AEPs and things like that go through directors. So I don't know if that speaks to that, or we can probably talk about it later. But I think the splitting hairs here is without the data, we don't know what to do. But with the data, we still have biases. And that's why a lot of the, we're going down that culture proficient, PDs to really unpack some of those.
The other thing I'd add to this, because that's absolutely a fair question, is that although in this report we're really talking about student behavior and not really academic performance, what we're putting in place with the MTSS system is not arbitrarily separating those two. And so looking at the whole child and saying what conditions are not right for this child that's either causing some behaviors that we would prefer not to have, or academic results that we want to see improved, and not necessarily separating those two, because they're necessarily intermingled, at least to some degree, in the school setting. So making the focus more on what do adults need to change for this child to be successful, rather than how we're going to get, how we're going to bump this kid out of our little sphere, so we don't have to deal with that anymore.
And to get to your question, when we look at tier 2, when we respond, change our response to kids, every site has decision-making rules that they'll have to set based on their data. So I can't tell you exactly like this number of referrals equals this, because the kids at different schools are different. And so each site has to set that. So that's one of the things they'll do to ensure that, if 80% of our kids are not responding to our instruction, then our instruction is not correct. So we have to do something different. So there's some of those decision-making rules that every school site said that will help with that.
Well, I guess it'll also be just part of a learning process as we go through this. I'm going to make it real quick because I know we are running later in the time. Expulsions, you mentioned the deferred expulsions. Not really much information going on about that was shared. I know you had said about 6 to 8 maybe per year of behavior that would be expulsions but are not. Does that mean that 6 to 8 students per year are also going into the deferred expulsion program, or is that higher?
No, that's exactly what it means.
What it is. Okay, I'm just wondering. Okay, and I'm really sorry. I've got it written all around here. My last one, if you guys figure out the attendance stuff, my kid still isn't a morning person and neither am I. So if you guys figure out that silver bullet, let me know. Leave it at that.
We're working on later start times. I'll be talking with the board about
Yes.
that.
Oh,
Seriously,
there are some-
later
yes.
just a little bit later this fall, we'll have something to talk about later start times for middle and high school.
And I just want a little, good.
Please. Caldwell Johnson.
I'll leave that comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation. Just maybe like 3 very quick questions. So in the very beginning, you said that this report was, let's see, all students, high level and global.
Yes.
Because we're going to be getting the drill down, especially on males of color. What does that mean for the other subgroups? When will we get data on the other subgroups?
Actually, you'll actually be getting that in the males of color.
Oh.
It'll be sub-popped
But,
out.
Okay. All
because we can't really tell the story of how we're doing with males of color without comparing with
Right.
other groups.
Okay,
Right,
thank you. I
Yep.
just wanted to make sure we weren't missing anything.
No.
Are there times when an offense cannot be accommodated or would create an unfair situation for other students relative to expulsion or deferred expulsion?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, when does that kick in?
Well, we haven't experienced one yet that we feel like crosses that line, but one of those things probably would, the biggest filter is, what danger are we putting other students in?
Right.
So for instance, none of the deferred expulsions have had to do with a firearm or a weapon. Now, we'll cross that bridge and we may not be able to accommodate every student. What has been the case in the past, when an expulsion level offense was documented, automatically got kicked up to central office, and if they appealed it, it would go to the board for a decision. And the last 2 years, we've felt very comfortable deferring those. In one case, though, 2 years ago, first year we went down this path, we did have a family that chose, it was all these were possession, drug possession related. A family did choose on their own dime to take their student to a private treatment center. But with that exception, all the other students, we were able to provide what we tried to put in place when we expelled, but had no way, as Tim said, to monitor, so that they were getting appropriate counseling and were staying engaged in academic progress. And the deferred expulsion allows us to actually monitor and make sure that those things happen, so that the student is made more healthy and progresses academically.
So I always felt like when we were doing expulsions, we always had to sort of split hairs, especially in the drug-related cases, where it was possession versus possession with intent. And I think that possession with intent clearly carries a higher order of magnitude
Agreed.
than possession. So in situations where we're talking about deferred, are we also deferring students that would be in possession with intent? Have we?
We have not yet.
We have not.
No.
Okay. Would we?
And if I can respond to the would we part, I think we have to consider that. When we look at drug and substance abuse and even possession, it's never by itself. There's something else that's addressed with the substance abuse. And that's part of the reason we've asked ASP to come to the table, is because that's not my expertise. That's definitely not Tim's. But what we're good at is bringing those resources together to say, how can we address that? So would we? Absolutely.
Okay. I think that's really important because, when we talk about treatment of students, one of the most significant things we talk about here is unsafe. And it's not just unsafe for the students, it's unsafe for the district and other students in the district.
Absolutely.
So that's why I really wanted to make sure I had clarity on that point. So thank you. And then finally, my only other comment is, will we be doing the Iowa Youth Survey when it's administered, this November?
Correct. We
Oh,
will.
outstanding. I'm working on another project where that data is critically important. So I'm glad that we're doing it this
Yes,
year. Thank you.
I just have a question about, this is a report that we're going to approve, and you marked it compliant. How is it compliant based on the data points?
Do you want me to respond?
Yeah, take it. I'll fill in if I feel like you leave something out.
Well, it depends on your lens, I suppose. So and there's 2 ways to look at it. The one way is the data telling a positive message about our work? And I think it is. And as with, again, the 4-year dropout rate being the exception, in every other case, the data, even if it's moving in a direction that appears to be negative, it's actually good and predicted, honestly, in every case, predicted to go that direction, because we're getting cleaner and clearer and more consistent and less variance with the inputs, essentially. Bullying is a case of that, and certainly level 2 plus referrals is a case of that. So on that, if you slice it that way, my feeling is absolutely compliant. Then the other perspective is the staff presenting information that answers the monitoring limitation question in a timely manner and thoroughly? And if taken from that perspective, regardless of whether the data is positive, negative, or your interpretation of that, I think we are. So again, that's two different ways of viewing that question, and I don't quite honestly know which way the board as a whole views it.
You'll soon find out.
Okay.
Ms. Ellsburn.
I think what we need to remember is that when we're looking at monitoring reports, we are looking at the interpretation of the policy, and if that interpretation is reasonable, and then if the data supports that and supports the direction that we want it to want that policy to take us. So that's the other part of that we need to remember when we're voting to accept these or not.
I would also offer, though, that in this particular case, especially since we have a follow-up report that really is looking at the other components that need to be monitored in the context of treatment of students, that maybe it's premature to accept this until we've had the opportunity to receive the next report. I don't know, but I would just offer that because this really is global. It doesn't drill down. We usually ask for disaggregated data, and that does not exist here. So I would offer that maybe we defer until we receive the follow-up report at the next board meeting and then vote on the monitoring in total. Just a thought.
Can you do that as a motion?
I'm just putting it out there to maybe to get some reaction.
Well, I want to make sure that the message is clear to the administration that if the information, that we're being clear about the information that we're asking for. And we have changed our monitoring process this year. I would say we've definitely improved our monitoring process this year to focus on some really specific things. So I wouldn't necessarily say this report lacked any information if it didn't have information that will be coming in an ensuing report. I would rather not see that information twice. And I'd like to see it then. I personally don't feel that there's any lack of information that I need to vote, but I'll let others respond. Ms. Langford, and then Ms. Ellsburn.
So I know that we've included monitoring reports on the Males of Color Initiative. Is this next information that you're going to be presenting a monitoring report itself, or is it a different report? Because I do think, recognizing this as a global perspective, that this monitoring report meets based on this interpretation. But if the other report that we're looking at is not a monitoring report and it's just additional information,
it is.
There are actually there, and just a reminder, there will be 3 Males of Color monitoring reports.
Okay, so if it's a separate entity and then we get to approve or disapprove that based on what we see, then
that was my interpretation from our discussion earlier. So, for instance, the academic achievement monitoring report didn't have as much drill down on elementary reading, for instance, because we didn't want to duplicate information that we're sharing with you. So the elementary reading monitoring reports will be separate monitoring reports that fall under the 4.1 series, as will the algebra reports.
Okay, because I do think that that's a very good point that Terry brings up in the sense of our treatment of students, that this data or that data will also be a fuller picture of actually what this is telling us. So I think this is compliant for the global picture, but I just want to make sure that the other one is its own separate monitoring report.
And before Cindy goes,
based off this policy?
The evaluation that the district submitted was emerging and partially compliant.
Okay, fair then.
I think that's been lost in the conversation.
Oh, okay.
Emerging partially is highlighted on the monitoring report.
I apologize.
No.
I thought it said compliant.
That's another one. That was a different one.
Shoot, sorry guys, I've been flipping back and forth between them. Yeah, I was looking at 4.1.2. Apologies. Cindy?
I was just going to agree with your assessment that of the fact that I think that this monitoring report can stand on its own and be voted on tonight.
Can anyone hear me?
Connie.
Wow.
Hey, please, the
Came
floor is
home and
yours.
got on my landline. I would agree that I believe for when you look at what the interpretation of this does fulfill it. But I've been asked to speak, sorry, but I've never had this kind of level of, I believe, maybe not exact information, but the process of how we're going to go about improving and gaining the information that they need to make really significant changes in how we handle and make sure that we fulfill this monitoring report.
Ms. Langford.
Is the monitoring report that we're going to be looking at the males of color, which we're really looking, assuming looking at all students of color, also off of 2.1 from that policy?
It's off of 4.1, actually, I believe. Isn't it?
Because somebody,
It will contain both academic and behavior information. It'll be a combination of both.
right, I just want to see which policy it matches up with.
Terry's looking at it.
Expectations.
It
That's
may,
student
it
expectation.
may fall most under 4.1, but there will be, our intent is to include information that would also have been included in 2.1.
Because, something I didn't bring up in this piece was something that did stick out to me, right? With all of the good things that we're doing was that Gallup data. And I think I mentioned that in the email as well, that 55% of our students were saying that they feel stuck or it was disengaged. And I wonder if there's any sort of association between treatment of students and that thing. And so I think one of the questions I was asking is how do we, I'd have to go back to the email to look at it, but I'm just wondering if there's some sort of association between the two, right? Because I think that that's data that is relevant and pertinent.
We believe it is. That's why we give the student poll.
Right.
Right.
We absolutely believe it is.
Right, so it just makes me wonder, based on some of that data that we'll get in that Young Men of Color report, but granted, we didn't include, since this is a global perspective, I'm wondering if aspects of that are associated, if that makes sense, in terms of our overall treatment. But since it's monitoring, I'm sorry, I'm externally processing out loud at the board table, so I apologize. But going back to that interpretation, since this is the first time we're really grappling with new monitoring reports that we're adding into the mix too. So I don't think this discussion is null or void. I think that it's probably helpful to be having here.
No,
if we're
it's a
gonna
really
continue to
good
do this.
discussion.
It is.
I agree.
It is,
So
absolutely.
interpretation, with respect to interactions with students, the superintendent shall not cause or allow conditions or procedures that are inequitable, unfair, unsafe, untimely, undignified, or unnecessarily intrusive. This is a global perspective. Based on this report, it looks like we're moving in the right direction. My thoughts are with the next monitoring report that comes out, if it's not based off of 2.1 and it's based off of our academic, it's gonna come out of student expectations in our 4-point pieces. Are there associations between that Gallup data tonight we saw with student engagement and our students of color experience and their experience in the
Absolutely.
district? Does that make sense? And how?
And I may be speaking out of turn here, but what my interpretation of what the desire of the board was for the males of color was not exclusive to 4.1, but it would also include 2.1.
Okay.
I think your interpretation.
And we'll
is
see a
correct.
series of them over the
Based
course
on what
of.
we've
3 of them,
talked
yeah.
about.
Mhm.
Right, over the course of the year. Okay, for that being said, my thoughts then is that I can approve this with recognition that we're going to get to look at those other pieces over the course of the year with our other 3 monitoring reports.
Mm-hmm.
The Gallup poll can be sub-popped out as well. And an interesting fact is
I'd love to see that, yeah.
our students of color actually respond higher than white students.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
So that you'll see that data point, and we will hopefully see that same trend in October when we take it again. But
Okay.
Additional comment, discussion? All right, well, I've heard from one board member who believes we should hold this until two weeks from now, and I've heard from 4 who've said that we can decide on it tonight.
We have a motion on the floor.
I would
We have a
agree.
motion
do.
on the floor.
Yep.
I would agree to
We
hold
have a
it.
motion on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead and vote.
vote on
Tonight.
holding it, or?
No, vote on the motion that's on the floor. We have a motion on the floor to accept the monitoring report.
Accept the monitoring report.
Yeah.
Before discussion.
All right. Well, then the motion is to approve the monitoring report that was brought to us tonight. Terry's right, we do have a motion and a second on the floor, so I'll ask for the votes.
Yes.
Ms. Boson votes yes. Motion passes 6-1. Thank you for the presentation. Appreciate it.
Can I make a
Tim and Jake.
suggestion? I know, but I think that this experience of looking at this data at a global is what our school teams do when they look at that data every day. So I would suggest, if you have time to sit with those teams and when you look at it at the building level, it makes a lot more sense about how they make decisions and get to specifically to pop out exactly what they're talking about, because they don't sit here and look at the data and go, what do we do? They go, where's the problem and what do we do about it? And so I think it gives it more of a tangible feel if you have an opportunity to do that, because they do that all the time. So if you ever wanted to do that, let me know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, our next item is item F3, DMPS legislative priorities for 2017. This is a discussion item. Dr. Ahart, do you want to present anything on this?
Well, essentially, I don't have much to add except that I think we learned quite a bit this past year in our lobbying efforts, and with the board legislative action committee, I think there's a real potential for traction on the early childhood front. And again, I think it's important that we clarify what our priorities are now. However, we have an election this year, and we don't know what the composition of especially of the Senate will be. Hopefully, there'll be some movement in both houses, but we don't know what we're facing there. But the better we can define where we want to put our emphasis, the better off we're going to be. I've been talking with Christopher and John pretty frequently throughout the summer. And I know that John has spent some time with the Polk County Early Childhood Group. So I'm just asking the board to look over essentially the same priorities as last year, and give approval to have this be the focus, or if you want to discuss, add items or remove items, whatever your pleasure. But I do think these are the four areas where we can get the most traction that will make the most difference for our kids.
Before I turn to my colleagues, I want to raise up one request that I have heard, and I can't remember who made it, but that at some point in time, we do have a presentation or an opportunity to interact with our lobbying team before this next session.
Right, yeah, and we're working on getting that scheduled for our next meeting, hopefully. I don't have commitments from John or Christopher yet, but
okay,
we've reached out that olive branch.
I think that was something that folks are interested in doing, so we'll try and get that going. Cindy, looked like you had something to say.
Yeah, there is a group that was convened by the United Way for their co-opportunity project in early childhood education that, as Tom mentioned, has been working with John Cacciatore on a more specific ask around preschool. And I did bring a copy of that one-pager that has been put together thus far, that I think once we do determine that preschool is going, for that to be a part of our legislative priorities, that we will have a much more specific ask, and hopefully more specific legislation that perhaps somebody would sponsor. Like Tom mentioned, we'll see what the election brings, but just wanted to share that with you, what's developed out of that group.
Thank you. Additional discussion?
Do we have a motion?
There's no action.
No action. I thought there was action on this one. No. Sorry.
Just watching everybody read intently.
Gotcha. Okay. Gotcha.
I would just interject. I think we need to be very focused and deliberate and clear. And if it gets down to 2 items versus the 4, or whatever, the AEA flow through, I think is going to be, I don't know if time and attention should be spent there as much as to some of the other items.
The AEA question is a good one, Connie, and I have some upcoming meetings with a legislator from the Cedar Rapids area who has some interest in this, and I've convened a meeting of 4 AEA chiefs and 4 superintendents from some of our larger urban districts a couple of weeks ago, and then I've followed up with John and Christopher. We have an approach, a more narrow approach that we think will characterize as a pilot, and really try to sell it that way. We're not putting anything on paper until we've had conversations with Upmeyer and the other representative. I can't recall his name. He's from the eastern part of the state, and we'll formulate what we think is the best potential path forward after those discussions. But I don't see that as being something that will be time consuming for the board, and it may be something that potentially we just decide to drop after we've had a chance to test the waters and then see who's in after the election.
I fully agree with it, that we should, I fully agree with that. I don't know the focus after some of the reactions, but I think we need to continue pressing on this, but as to focus and narrow in from a board standpoint.
Right.
Additional thoughts, questions? Mild criticism. All right, moving on, F4, notification of award of competitive quote. This is an information item, it's an information item. No action on this item. Seeing no interest in discussion, moving on to F5, Youth Advisory Committee. This is discussion item, and Ms. Langford had requested this item be placed on our agenda, so I'm going to turn the discussion over to you.
Okay. Well, for the general public, every board member is appointed to a variety of committees, and I need to publicly state from the get-go, I am hearing this information secondhand because I did drop the ball and not make it to any of the youth committee meetings this year. So I want to go on the record saying that and recognize that the communication that I had was with the the 2 teachers that were leading that group after reaching out at the end of the school year and trying to just touch base and prepare for the upcoming school year. Natasha Newcomb was also a part of that committee and made it to several meetings, I hear. But I reached out to both of the teachers just to touch base, to understand what took place this year and make plans for moving forward. And at that point, they shared that due to some of their experiences this past year, that they would no longer feel that they were the best ones to lead this committee. And so it prompted a larger conversation to me, since it is a board, advised board. A lot of the issues that they mentioned were around communication. They had stated that originally they were just supposed to be the facilitators of the group and not have to come up with any content, but that was not their experience this past year. That they felt that the students, so they decided to move forward with cultural proficiency work, and had done that a lot of the year, but then felt that students' time essentially was being wasted because they weren't asked until I think the very end of the year for the students to come and present to the board. And then at that point, they'd already told the students that it wasn't going to happen. And so taking board ownership, then it just, for me, is so if this is a committee, how do we reinvigorate life into it? I know it was started, I believe, by you, Rob and Cindy.
Yeah.
Dick Murphy, sorry, that was not you, Rob. I apologize.
Well, no, I don't mind you giving me credit for things I haven't done. Typically, it's nice.
But I sent you all out the 4 questions that I think that we really should just talk about in terms of this committee, and that is, what's the purpose of the Youth Advisory Board? What are its goals for the upcoming school year?
How are students selected and who shall facilitate the group? Because my understanding is that we are just observers in this process and bring feedback back to the board table.
Okay, I'm happy to give a little history. This committee was started a few years ago. I believe my second year on the board. And the idea was to give youth voice and be able to have youth input and feedback to the board. The first year, it was that group actually put together a survey for students to collect data on how they felt that they were being treated. It was part of what was going to be used in our treatment of students report at the time, and then that survey was replaced with when we started using the Gallup poll. Then it had a little change of direction into some sort of connectivity with our K-5 middle and high schools around activities and that type of work. And then it moved into the cultural proficiency work that it did the year before last. And then I think you mentioned they were still doing cultural proficiency work. I think the main thing that we need to remember when we talk about any committee of the board is that it is to help us with our board work. So if we want to have this youth advisory committee continue, then we need to decide what the scope of that work is, and if we want it to continue as a board committee. And in my mind, that wouldn't be to advise around cultural proficiency work. It would be to help us to gain feedback around our treatment of students report for our management limitation report, or it would be to get input toward any of our ends policies. I think the cultural proficiency work that they're doing is fantastic. I love that they're doing it. I think as a staff advisory, that would be fantastic. So I think too, we need to decide, do we want to keep it as a board, as a board committee, or turn it over to the staff as a staff committee that can be led by staff, and then maybe at times we would call upon it for the kind of feedback that we needed for treatment of students or legislative activity or what have you. I don't know, that's just a thought.
Natasha?
I did end up, I went to a few of their meetings, and I'll have to say, I know the teachers they're stretched thin and had a lot of work, and they do other things than just this committee, but the students in the conversation was engaging. I mean, it just amazed me, the topics that they touched, and even the short amount of time, because the meetings were short, and there's free pizza. They had a lot of goals. I know they're talking about trying to getting the other schools to meet. So I think there's a lot of value in this, and I just want to lift up what they've been working on. Even if we didn't get to observe it, they should be very proud of themselves and at least having these conversations that some adults can't even have. So props to them for that. But going back, I think there's value in us maintaining the Youth Advisory Board as a board, because we talk about linking and trying to reach out to our community, and here's a great example where the students are, if we develop in a way, we can really bridge that gap. And those students are really motivated and want to be doing something, so I think we should, I didn't know my role, so I would go there and I would watch and thank them. But now, if we define something, I think we could really take advantage of what's happening and their perspective. I don't know, they might actually even know more of what they are interested in telling us. But I would be, I would be observing, as Deanna said, and if we kind of develop something around it more, I guess.
Ms. Langford?
And that we had with these two teachers in particular was just kind of around communication and how we did or didn't communicate, taking ownership as the board, right, in terms of we should be clear, right, in what our expectations for this group are. also recognizing, I think that there's an administrative piece to that as well, though, because apparently there was supposed to be an actual facilitator, or maybe not. Sorry, I guess I'm asking, was there a piece for a facilitator role? And then what does that look like? Because if this is a board for the, typically our role is we're silent observers, right? And most of we take back what we bring, but we don't necessarily have
If I'm on a board.
a voting member. Most of we're just advisory in nature in our roles on the boards that we participate in. And so my question then is, if once we articulate what we want, which is the first step, the second is it our concern about how it gets carried out or no?
I can't give you a complete response to that. My understanding is when it was originally initiated, we assigned, I believe, 2 staff members. Was it Jason and Allison that helped form recruit the students and get 2 years ago? Or Matt?
It was
Matt.
right. It was Matt prior to that, and Bryce Amos the first year. Yeah.
Yeah. But my understanding was that was initiated by the board. Whomever on the board was serving on that committee.
Okay.
So the administration is very happy to support whatever the will of the board is on that. I haven't been directly involved the last couple of years. My assumption was that was just carrying on however the board had directed it. But
so, I mean, it seems like the opportunity for us to really redefine what we want, which is why we're having this discussion. And I agreed with a piece of what you said, right? It really is about hearing their feedback to advise us in our work. I also think there's really important leadership and engagement piece of our students that their voice really isn't represented too often at this table. That's necessary for us.
Right, and that was the intent of it was started. Right. Correct.
So I guess I don't know if that looks like, since the committee itself is primarily of youth, how do we go about creating those goals or the purpose for what we want this group to be this year or continually?
You guys are looking at me, and
no, I thought you had something to say.
Well, a couple of things I would offer, but do you have something else to say?
I can wait.
Okay.
Yep.
So they do represent the largest constituency that we have, 32,000 of them. And obviously the voice that we get is the voice of our older students, our high school students, but they represent the continuum of the experience that they've had in our district. So I don't know that we could dismiss that as being an important voice that we shouldn't hear. I also believe, though, that to your point, Deanna, the questions that you posed are exactly the questions that we need to have clarity around so that we can provide clarity to them. And I don't know if there was an original charge that was presented, Cindy, when it was originally developed that we might be able to reflect back on to help us really inform how we create a new charge. Right. But if there's something that exists, we don't need to start from scratch. But if not, then I definitely think that we need to have that thoughtful conversation about what this is, what it looks like, how they function, how we function in relation to them, what kind of support we provide, and then how we use that as a platform to inform our work as a board. So if we need to sort of start from scratch, then we need to do that. But if something else exists, then I think that's a good starting point.
Okay, and yeah, I agree. I will have to look back and see if there was some sort of document or if it was, or maybe even back into the minutes of when that was. And I'm willing to look back through my stuff and through minutes to figure that out. If we already had something in writing, I can't recall at this point. But yeah, I do agree that, and then we do need to answer those questions. And I'll just throw out there that we need to do that for a number of our committees. We do. But yeah, let's start with this one since this has been brought forward by you. Thank you. And I completely agree. I hope I didn't sound dismissive for the student voice because that was the complete intent of ever bringing it forward. But I think we do need to really focus in on what their purpose and authority is and how we're going to support that. So happy to help with that.
Natasha and then Deanna.
Okay. Going along with having their voice, and I'm just going to put it out there. Maybe having a spot on our agenda for, or at least a standing place if they want to provide feedback. I understand we have feedback from the public, but a report, if they want to say something that's related or unrelated, I guess, but just giving them an opportunity to briefly, a 3-minute presentation, and every time we meet, just having it as an option for them.
It might be too much.
Well, it definitely sounds like this is probably going to be a larger work session that we're going to have to schedule at some point, but just a couple of thoughts based on what we've already talked about. Since everything we do is essentially around policy, maybe tying their work specifically to either our 4.1s, our student expectations policy, or our treatment of students in our 2.1 could maybe be some sort of starting point. I mean, that's a very broad idea. I also liked what you stated about having a multi-generational effect. I think that logistically there's probably a lot of things to think about, and even the two teachers talked about in terms of transportation, time, investment, incentive, outcome for our students to be involved in this, but that may be more means work. Superintendent, it sounds like in terms, and maybe our focus is just creating what we want it to look like.
Well, yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. As I've been listening to this discussion, one thing that we have wrestled with as a board and as a district team now for a number of years, and we're starting to make some progress, but I think student voice could be very valuable on, is how do we best monitor, especially the 4.1.2 and 4.1.3. The self-directed and autonomous, effective problem solvers, all those sort of intangible things that we are trying to instill, but we don't have good hard measures for. That might be something that they could help us figure out how to tell that story more effectively. That might be one way for them to directly support the work of the board. That'd be one thing that might be helpful.
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest thing is that if we do commit to move forward with it, that it just not be a token group, but that it's really a group that is solicited, right, for their feedback, and that their time isn't. Essentially, I know it's great that they're having conversations, but that we find a way for them, whatever that looks like, to be deeply ingrained in the work that we do.
So what I'm going to recommend to Rob is that we maybe spend more time on this, and maybe ask Deanna and Natasha to maybe do a little more research, to maybe come back with a set of ideas based maybe even on any information that Cindy may have, to really sort of help kickstart the next conversation that we have, but doing this sooner versus later, so potentially we can have something in place at least during the first semester to get moving. Is everybody okay with that?
Just a follow-up question.
I would agree with that, sooner since school's starting.
Yep, thanks, Connie. Go ahead, Deanna.
Are we appointed to committees annually or every 2 years?
Actually, I think it's annually that we revisit. It may not mean that anything changes. You may stay, but we may make some adjustments, so.
Okay.
Yeah, great. Okay, anything else on that subject? All right, then the next item on our agenda is the chair's report, and on behalf of Rob, I have several things I want to share. We have Wednesday, August the 24th, 5:30 p.m., the Downtown Library, our joint meeting with the Des Moines City Council. So hopefully everybody will be able to join us for that. Next Saturday, if you haven't already signed up, we have the graduation walk, and this is as much for us as it is for the community, encouraging people to go to the United Way website to sign up. And there's a focus this year not only on attracting students that are undercredited and maybe even miscredited.
Thank you.
Now we have that term in our lexicon, but then also students with attendance challenges as well. That's a new sort of added element to this year's graduation walk. And I'm sorry, I'm going to be traveling next weekend, so I'm not going to be able to be there, but I've recruited several other people to be there on my behalf. So
awesome.
And then finally, one other quick thing that Rob and I had been working on, we are not going to have our scheduled work session tonight. We're going to defer for a couple of weeks, but just pass this out as information. Might need a couple more. To our board colleagues, Rob and I met a couple of weeks ago with Tom to identify an instrument to use for our superintendent evaluation this year. And Tom was kind enough to sort of develop a rubric that not only gives us a way to look at broad sections of our monitoring without having to individually rescore each monitoring report, but rather scoring the broad areas. And then we've also added a couple of new areas for consideration: community and civic engagement, and responding to influencing the larger political, social, economic, legal, and cultural context. So this is just information tonight, but if you'll have a chance to review it before we actually calendar it for our next work session, maybe we can come back and be a little bit more expeditious in how we dispense with our discussion on this. We've actually put together a timeline on the back that really helps us to identify those blocks of time that we're going to have to set aside to move through the process for the 2017 evaluation. But again, this is FYI tonight to be discussed at a subsequent board meeting. And are there any other items of privilege?
Real quick question. As I saw that this was brought up, and I apologize if I missed a meeting or anything, but I know I'm on the committee for this. So I don't know if I'm still on the email list or not.
So this was actually a pre-meeting that we had with Tom just to put together the instrument. There will be subsequent work done on this where you'll be involved.
Okay, well, I guess I'm just looking at the committee structure on our website, and I'm not, okay.
This was jump starting our work.
Okay.
Okay, we're not done.
Oh, I know you're not done, but it's never done. All right.
Other items of privilege? Anybody else?
I will just mention that I did go to the Culture and Climate Summit as well, attended both days, and I wish Jake was still here because it was well done, well executed. Content was fantastic. I heard a lot of wonderful feedback. I'm hoping that a lot of people filled out the feedback surveys, and love that they have a head start on next year, and look forward to attending that as well. It was really good.
I wasn't able to go, but I heard from a lot of teachers, they absolutely loved it. I think it's fantastic that Des Moines is leading the charge, and I feel like it's only going to get bigger, better. It's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Connie, you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Anything to share on items of privilege?
No, I don't at this moment.
Okay, all right. So we'll move to the superintendent's report.
Okay, I'll try to keep this brief, but if you've not been to the fair yet, and I'm sure you will be, we have 3 staff members at our booth, and so far it really feels like that's the right thing to do. I don't know what our tally is now, but I know the very first day, which was actually a low attendance day because of the heat, we registered 2 students that we may not have otherwise gotten. Who knows? Folks can apply for jobs online there. They can get all sorts of DMPS swag. And there's a really nice video that sort of highlights the district. I've gotten comments from a number of people unrelated to the district that think it represents the district really well. So stop by and see what you think. I really would be anxious to hear board feedback on what your perceived value of that enterprise is. But right now, if I had to make an assessment, I'd definitely say we'll do that again and make that investment. And the second thing, some of you have already mentioned it, but I have to say that our staff has made such a tremendous opportunity from our Culture and Climate grant that we almost didn't apply for 3 years ago because we were applying for the Wallace grant at the same time. And we've really turned to both of those opportunities into things that are going to keep on giving. And we have a good plan for sustainability once those grant dollars go away. And that Culture and Climate Summit, even from the big name presenters to a person, have given us all sorts of accolades about the focus that we're putting on this work, the importance of this work, and how impressed they are with our game plan moving forward. So it was really good to have about 200 out-of-district participants that represented, I believe, 4 different states other than Iowa, and we expect that participation rate to grow. And the more we grow that, the more sustainable it is, and the less money it costs us to provide those same very high-level opportunities that we designed to specifically meet our needs. So thank you to Jake and the entire team that put that together. And that's all I have.
Okay. Without objection, our meeting is adjourned.